place with Pokémon over level 100, with tons of weird evolutions that only exist there, and donuts? Are we still talking about Pokemon, or did I just stumble onto one of those early 2000s Pokemon rumor websites again? In my recent videos, I already said everything interesting I had to say about Legends Z-A, and I was ready to drop the subject. But Pokemon just won't give me a break and has stirred things up again. Way earlier than... Wait. This is coming out in a month? In the DLC Pokemon Mega Dimension, apparently a strange phenomenon starts spreading in Lumio City. Some distortions that, with the help of Little Hoopa, we'll be able to explore to venturing to the new Hyperspace Lumios. And I say new with that tone because in a game that only had one city, instead of bothering to add even a few new locations in the DLC, they just crank up the brightness and lower the saturation on the same map. Honestly, that's pretty wild. But once we're there, it looks like we're going to run into something nobody could have seen coming. A line it seemed Pokemon would never cross. Pokemon above level 100. Like I was saying, it's all very reminiscent of those early years of the series, when rumors and fake cheats about secret areas with Pokegods at level 150 were everywhere. And it's not the first time Game Freak has taken inspiration from those kinds of innocent myths for future concepts, but going beyond level 100 sets an interesting precedent for the series, and I can't help but wonder how they're going to handle it. Personally, I think it would have been awesome if only the rival Pokemon in those areas appeared at those crazy high levels, while we were still capped at 100. That could have been a challenge like we've never seen before in the series, in line with how, in the previous DLC, they really tried to introduce semi-competitive battles that could actually be a challenge even for expert players. Unfortunately, it looks like our own Pokemon will also be able to surpass the level cap, at least in those areas, so I'm really curious to see how they're going to handle it. Will it just be that there's a new cap, say at 200 or so, making it all just a trivial detail? Or are the levels just going to keep scaling endlessly in there, trying to create some kind of infinite challenge that can't just be steamrolled with brute force? Kind of like what Pokorogue tried to do, that fan game that went viral a while back. Either way, I guess that system will stay there in Legends Z-A and won't make its way into the main series. Although, there's also the possibility that they're testing out some early idea to remove levels from the equation at certain points, and play around with difficulty in future generations. Speaking of which, a lot of people are comparing this Hyperspace Lumios to the Distortion world from Generation 4. But do you know what it actually reminded me of the most? With all those weird things happening and Pokemon above level 100, it actually takes me back much more to those old tricks to get to Glitch City. Maybe it reminds me of that because of the focus on the new Raichus, and because those kinds of glitches were closely tied to the poor programming of Cinnabar Island, the place where that famous NPC lived who, even back then, talked about his Raichu having evolved. And yes, I know that dialogue was a mistake in the Western translations, but even so, all of this has a certain nostalgic vibe to it. Personally, I still think these Mega Raichus have something to do with spiky-eared Pichu and Pikachu-colored Pichu, those two buddies who used to hang around the Ilex forest and got into time travel trouble with Celebi. I guess, strictly speaking, that won't actually be them, but maybe there's some inspiration there, like we were saying about Pokemon's habit of bringing back old ideas and giving them a new twist. Something interesting is that in the trailer, they directly refer to these dimensional anomalies as distortions, which, at least linguistically, connects with Legends Arceus and its space-time distortions. And I bring this up because a lot of us were hoping for at least a minimal connection between the games in the Legends series. For Arceus' sake, the Quasarticle logo is identical to the rift in the sky that you could see from inside those distortions. How could there not be any connection there? In the end, the events of Legends Arceus and Z-A have ended up being very isolated from each other. In fact, aside from a few specific references, they feel even more isolated than usual for Pokemon games, which typically always play with some sense of continuity. I guess these distortions, even though at first glance they seem like different things that have nothing to do with each other, exist to leave the door open for there to eventually be some connecting thread that we're just not seeing yet, and maybe we'll finally be able to understand it in the final installment of this Legends saga. But going back to the Megas, this very trailer has shown us, out of nowhere and much sooner than anyone expected, two new ones, Chimecho and Baxcalibur. That suggests this DLC is going to have a ton of new Mega evolutions, maybe even more than we anticipated. Let's take a quick look at these two for now, while we wait for a more in-depth analysis, which, as always, I'll bring you when the game is released. Mega Baxcalibur isn't much of a mystery. This Pokemon is an epic representation of the Concavinator, combined with the usual kaiju-like appearance of pseudo-legendaries and its characteristic back protrusion, which takes the form of a sword stuck in its back that the species uses as a weapon. Because of its English name, it has always been associated, obviously, with Excalibur, the famous sword of King Arthur. But I have to say, I've always had my doubts about whether it's really based on that. Its original Japanese name literally means sword back, making no direct reference at all to the Excalibur myth, which, as you all know, was stuck with its blade buried and the hilt exposed. Unlike this Pokemon, which has the blade sticking out, as makes sense since it attacks with it, and doing the opposite would be totally stupid and dysfunctional. I've always thought this design actually represents the classic iconography of a dragon defeated by a knight's sword, stabbed through its torso and coming out its back, which fits perfectly for its ice dragon type, as if the knight knew about dragon's weakness to that element and used the weapon imbued with it to defeat it. In Mega Baxcalibur, this becomes much more obvious, moving even further away from that myth, with the greatsword taking on a much longer and more literal form, and its kaiju-like aspect becoming even more apparent. Someone please explain to me how they're going to add 100 base stat points to this thing without completely breaking the game. Chimecho, on the other hand, is one of the species that could really benefit from one of these transformations. It's a being I've always felt was special, with its rare capture in a sacred place like the summit of Mount Pyre at an extremely low probability. Its performance in battle has always felt blatantly poor for that kind of aura, like the sound of a bell we can hear but never fully appreciate. There have already been cases like this, Pokemon that are very hard to catch but end up being mediocre in battle and don't reward that effort. But like with Dunsparce, they usually get their redemption later on, which makes everything make sense. But Chimecho stayed the same, with just a new pre-evolution in the 4th generation, which honestly didn't add much. It was a forgotten enigma, a silenced chime that now rings again. Mega Chimecho takes on a much more ceremonial appearance, like the main bell of an important temple, which, by the way, as you've probably noticed, has shapes very similar to those of the baby Chingling. We've already seen this trend before, for Alligator resembling a giant Totodile when attacking, or Dragonite regaining the celestial features of Dratini. It's a kind of regression to childhood mechanism, and I wonder, is this simply a new artistic trend from the people in charge of designing the Mega Evolutions? Or is there something specific about the way Mega Energy manifests in this game that makes them tend to simplify and magnify their most basic traits? In any case, Chimecho already pointed toward that mysticism, and Chingling, precisely because it's the pre-evolution of a Pokemon that's mediocre in battle, was one of the most forgotten species in the entire Pokédex, so highlighting one while redeeming the design of the other is a great double reward. We'll have to see where these new Megastones can be found. Maybe we can ask Karina. I guess subtlety was never her strong suit, although she was always a pretty heroic character, so maybe that over-the-top design actually fits, like that of a mega superheroine. And honestly, one of the things I missed most in Legends Z-A was seeing more classic characters from Kalos. I mean, where's Clement? It's not enough that I forgot about the poor guy in my video about gym leader trivia. Now they had to erase him from the map in a game about the very city he cares so much about. But more importantly, his gym was in Prism Tower, which plays such a big role in this game. Did they move him to another city because of the imminent danger? Or is it that gyms just don't exist in Kalos anymore? Why don't we get any kind of explanation, no matter how small, for any of this? Similarly, the fact that there wasn't a single reference to Karina, the very person who introduced us to Mega Evolution in X and Y and taught us about this phenomenon in the first place, was pretty wild. And now she's finally here. Better late than never. Although, for now, she leaves us with more questions than answers. Is this the same Karina from X and Y who, I don't know, kept researching Mega Evolution on her own until she mastered it? Or is she going to be another traveler from the alternate dimensions that this epilogue's plot seems to revolve around? The other new face, sort of, is Ansha, Hoopa's bestie, who apparently is the one helping us travel through those alternate dimensions with the jelly donuts she makes. There's nothing like a jelly donut. It's interesting how they've brought that back from the movies, and because of her appearance, many people are connecting her to Diantha. Is she really a character related to her? Or even, as some people are speculating, a young Diantha who took on that form as a side effect of dimensional travel and is using a pseudonym until she gets her normal appearance back? I don't think that's the direction they're going with this. At first glance, her look and color palette reminded me much more of Marnie, but honestly, that character doesn't really fit in at this point, so I don't know what to think. Honestly, it really seems like another clickbait design that looks like certain things, but in the end, it's not going to have anything to do with what it seems. She even has a little hat that reminds me of Milcery, so she could very well just be a pastry girl who became friends with Hoopa by bribing him with sugar and carbs. But if this whole arc ended up being about helping the Kalos champion get her form back, that would be pretty funny. I'm not saying it wouldn't. As for the rest of the characters, we'll be going on this adventure, of course, with our loyal companions, Team MZ. And it's... wait, is that an emotion? As I explained in my video review of the game, for me, they were a really disappointing group, especially compared to what we've seen in previous generations, and even compared to the other secondary characters in their own game. So, while we're at it, I'd really like to see them get a bit more care and development in this new episode, especially Urbain and Tony, who really let me down and I think could make a big comeback here, even if it's just to surpass their predecessors from XY, who they're pretty much neck and neck with right now. For now, if you haven't already, check out the other videos I made about Legends Z-A, where I go in depth about its megas and explain why I didn't like its story. Be nice.